You know, it's really wonderful to follow Kalia and Liam because they have, you know, done the local bird's eye view of what's going on, and they've also told you what I'm going to tell you, which is it really is kind of too soon to tell what's going to happen. So let's just do our best and kind of figure it out. Just two quick things from C.A.R. One is we do provide 45 free hours of CE, so if you need to renew your license this year, you can do it through C.A.R. I want to clear up one rumor that it's only good 24 hours before your license expires, and that's not the case. You actually can do it earlier. Secondly, if you've been on our website, and I wouldn't have said this in earlier years because our website was a little bit dated, we have a really cool, great website, and it features realtors from around the state, and every year they do a professional photo shoot, hair, makeup. It's fabulous. So if you want to be considered or apply to be in the chair, there's a lot of you have to go to the website and there's an application and they're going to do the photo shoot this summer. So think about it, right? Be fun. Oh, I guess I do have one more thing. We do a podcast with leaders and legends from around the state. So if you've got a little bit of a drive, download Leaders and Legends, and you'll hear about some of the people in the history of the California brokerage industry who have really made a difference. And it's a lot of fun. And then my final comment is just about social media. I caution you to just think before you post. I've heard the anecdotal story a couple of times from people who said, I got a phone call from a homeowner who wanted me to list their home because their family friend of 30 years, who's also a realtor, they happened to visit their Facebook page and decided that politically they never could work together. So you might, like, if you feel really strongly, and I know people do, about politics these days, maybe you can have like a second page where you can like rant and rave, but just kind of think about your business and what we're really here for, which is to help people get into housing, right? And to help people find a house that's right for them in that particular time. So I just really appreciate the information that was just shared on what happened here with the Thomas fire. I actually updated the slide this morning, then I realized I already sent my stuff in. So sorry about that, but I do have, you know, the fire was officially declared over on January 4th, and the numbers here are just a little bit bigger than they look, but it was really obviously horrific. And then we had the mud flows and just really been hit by a lot throughout the state this year. We look back at the kind of the most comparable experience that I could come up with, and that was back in 1993, and I know some of you remember the Malibu fires at that time were really, really tough, but not nearly as big in terms of impact as what went on with the Thomas fire. And we saw that, you know, the sales really didn't kind of miss a beat, and again, that was a relatively small part of the whole LA County, but we did have a bigger decline in price as opposed to what was going on statewide. So I think the answer to all this is it's really going to depend. It's going to depend on what happens to insurance, insurance costs, for instance. It's going to depend on the age of the homeowner. Are they going to want to wait around and go through the process to get new plans approved and get the debris taken off their lot and do it again? And maybe they're going to be old enough that, hey, I'm going to just sell the lot and get into a condo. It's going to push me into that. I have a number of friends and brokers up in Napa Sonoma who are going through that rebuilding process right now. And the good news is the rebuilding is happening, but it's going to take a long time, and people are making very different decisions based on where they are in their kind of lifestyle plan, if you will. So what do we expect? We do expect to see fewer sales in Montecito this year, absolutely, right? It's just going to take time to clear that mud and to kind of see what we've got going there. Long run, you'll be back, right? There's no substitute for this, right? I mean, it will recover and improve, but until that, people are going to have to make some really tough decisions. You're going to have a little bit of upward pressure on the rental market. You know, it's sad, it's devastating. It's really going to be tough. As you know, we already have a very tight inventory situation. Kalia covered that very well. So again, this just kind of exacerbates the fact that there's not enough inventory. There were lower priced homes that were impacted. There were, you know, mega estates that were impacted. So that's going to be a problem, and it increases the cost of home ownership, right? When you're having to go through the process to permit and plans and all of that stuff and rebuild. So it's you wouldn't choose to go through it, but we're going to have to help the people there do so. I do want to let you know, if you're not aware, that we have had for a number of years a disaster relief fund. The amount of money allocated per application ranges from about $1,000 to $10,000, and it takes about 2 to 3 weeks for it to go through the process and the money to be delivered. So if you've had an impact on your housing, or if you know somebody in our industry who has, take a look at our website. Just search for the Disaster Relief Fund, or email me directly, and I'll send you in the right direction, and we'll get the application filled out. And we've had a lot of utilization of this fund in 2017, and it's really wonderful to see realtors helping other realtors, and C.A.R. providing money as well to make that happen. So again, it's really too soon to tell. We prefer not to be talking about it, but we're all going to get through this together. I loved what Kalia said at the end about people come here for the beauty but stay here because of the people. And you know, the realtor community is a big part of that. Let me move on to the other kind of big news. I will say, have not we been waiting for this correction for a couple of years? I mean, I hope I'm not the only one that's a little bit relieved that it finally happened, right? Because the values were just a little bit too out of sync. So we've had a strong market for the last 5 years. One of the things I've talked about every year for the last few years is in a low rate environment with a strong economy, people with cash had only 2 options: real estate and equities, right? And so those were the 2 areas where you had a lot of money flowing in. The Dow was up 25% last year, the S&P was up 19%, the NASDAQ was up 28%, the market peaked in January 26. And then we had a big correction. We're still in the midst of it. I think we're coming back up the bottoms, but I think it's too early to call the final bottom, to be honest with you. This volatility could go on for a while. And what's driving it is uncertainty, right? What's driving it is what's going to happen to inflation going forward, and what's going to happen to interest rates. And so the markets are kind of trying to figure out what that means. I will tell you that the fundamentals of the economy look pretty darn good. None of that's changed between January 26th and today. We have what I would consider to be, by any measure, a full employment economy. The wage inflation that we're starting to see, I would argue, is really positive, right? The growth that we've had in the last 5 years, where more and more people have been put to work, has not shown up in terms of rising wages. And we need to have consumers with disposable income, right? We need to have consumers building their down payments, right, in order to get into the market. And we're really starting to finally see some of this wage increase. All of the money isn't just going to the owners of capital. So I think that's a very, very good thing. Obviously, the downside of a strong economy, right, and the correction that we're seeing is we've had a big uptick in yields, right? So we got used to, and I used to tell people that, you know, weren't around in the 80s, right? When I still remember, and I see Diana's here, Diana Bull, you know, I remember the Real Estate Finance Committee at C.A.R. in the early 80s, and there would be 500 people in the room in that committee, and they were there because they wanted to figure out how to tape together a loan because mortgage rates were 18%. right? And it was all about the financing at that time. And don't get me wrong, I don't think we're headed back there in any way, shape, or form. But the 3.5%, 3.8%, 4% that we've gotten used to is going away, right? I think we're currently at about 4.3 for new originations, investor loans. I was told just a few minutes ago we're like 4.5, 4.6. So it's a little bit tighter, and we're already seeing that in the weekly numbers, right? At the end of February 8th, the Freddie Mac survey was at 4.3 for 30-year fixed and at 3.57. So why do we care about this so much? Well, it has a direct impact on mortgage payments and the ability to qualify. So if you are at buying the median priced home at about $550, so this is just as an example, at 3%, your mortgage payment is around $1,800. At 6.5% is $2,700. The minimum qualifying income with the same increase from 3 to 6.5 goes from $99,000 to $136,000, and housing affordability drops from 33% down to 21%. So that's why we're going to be watching the rate environment very, very carefully. And I've been more concerned about this than I was about some of the new provisions in the tax code. So let's talk about tax reform for a minute. It's been a little bit of a wild ride. The perspective of organized real estate, which is Santa Barbara Association, California Association, National Association, is that every piece of legislation and every regulation is viewed from the same lens. How will this impact the ability of our members to be successful in their business? Okay, so that's why we have been so ferocious on issues like the secondary mortgage market and preserving the mortgage interest deduction and those types of things. And this was a little bit of a tough bill because you had some things happen that really benefited a lot of people, right? Rates went down, right? The tax rates went down. And who doesn't want a lower tax rate, you know, so that's more money in your pocket. And they didn't touch the mortgage interest deduction except they lowered the cap, right? It went from a $1 million cap to a $750,000 cap, but the mortgage interest deduction stayed, you know, in place. But what they did do is they capped state and local taxes, right? So you've got it all of a sudden, out of nowhere, you've got a $10,000 cap. And who does that hurt? That hurts coastal California, that hurts urban New York, that hurts New Jersey. Someone called this payback, not policy. I don't know if I want to go that far, but I will tell you it's the blue states on either side of the coast that have been hit the hardest. So I've got a number of slides that are going to be obviously a little bit too tight to read, but essentially this looks at single returns, and it looks at married returns, and it shows you the prior tax rates. We have the same number of tax rates, but the brackets are much higher. So I'll just give you an example. For single, 28% used to be the marginal rate at 28% was people earning between $93,700 and $195,400, and that's now, with the Tax Cuts and Job Act, that's only 24%, right? So you have a lower tax rate, and the brackets are $82,000 to $157,000. So some people are definitely better off in terms of their pocketbook. What the problem for us is, we were supporting a tax code that said, in effect, home ownership is good and we want to support it, and we want to incentivize people to buy homes to live in. And that was the bottom line. It wasn't looking at everybody's tax return and saying, hey, you're going to be better off, let's go for it. We are looking at the business side of it in terms of, you're not going to have anything to increase if you're not selling houses. And we didn't want to lose that. So any new loan taken out after December 14th is under the new caps. Current loans are already grandfathered in. Interest on second homes remains deductible. Remember, in the House bill, it was impacted, but it's under that limit, right? So it's Before it was 1 million, now it's 750. And if you decided to file, if you're married and decided to file jointly, it's half that amount, right? That's not a creative way to get around it. And then you have the cap on state and local taxes. So all of these things kind of create an environment where if you're a renter, you don't have a tax incentive to be a homeowner, right? Just in terms of looking at taxes. Now, we do a lot of surveys just like everybody else, and it's a relatively small percentage of people that say they're actually buying a home because of the tax consequences. So we don't expect it to be kind of a, you know, a market, a global market changer, but for people at the margin, it is going to make an impact. And when you look at a state that's been grappling with an intensifying housing affordability crisis, this really is an issue. Home equity loans, you can deduct the interest if you're using the money to improve the residence. If not, no. The capital gains exclusion remains, and like-kind exchanges, we were so relieved to see this stayed in, right, at where they were before. So this just kind of summarizes what I've just said. You know, this is going to be a problem because it's not incentivizing home ownership, and you're going to have people that might have thought about moving saying, hey, I'm going to lose this cap. I'm in that 750 to 1 million range, so I'm not going to make that decision to go. I'm going to stay put. And there's all kinds of other reasons why baby boomers aren't moving. This just adds kind of another one, right? And in higher priced areas like this, that could be, again, an issue for some people. So what we did is we did an analysis of the impact in terms of prices, in terms of sales, and in terms of the change in supply, and we broke it out by price category. So $200,000 home, $300,000 home, $400,000 home, all the way up to a $5 million home. And the biggest impact in terms of changes in value occur in the 1.5 to 2 million category, the biggest in terms of a lower pressure on prices. In terms of slower sales, that also is included in that 1.5 to 2 million category, and also in terms of the change in supply. So there's a bit of a sweet spot, you know, where maybe you're making around 450,000 to 700,000. Again, very rarefied air for many of us. Very wealthy people that are paying all cash for these amazing properties. This isn't an issue for them, but it is an issue for kind of the mid-level in high-price areas in the states that I mentioned. Here's just a look at what parts of the state fall into those categories, and I'm sure Kalia can tell us this for Santa Barbara. But in Southern California, 37% of the sales are in the $500 to $1 million range, 10% are the $1 million and up, and under 500,000 is 53%. The most expensive areas, obviously, the most impacted are going to be overall up in the Bay Area. 60% of first-time buyers are buying properties under 500,000, and 80% of them are buying 750 and below. I don't know that many first-time buyers without a lot of help that are buying above that point. And for the most part, they're not making enough money that they're going to really be impacted by this too much. It's really going to be the trade-up buyers in that over $1 million category that I mentioned before. And then here's kind of a look at the side effect on the rental market, because obviously not only renting, but also investing in rental property, because you can still deduct all your costs, is going to be more favored by the tax code today than it was before. And so when all is said and done, I don't want to spend all my time on this, but when all is said and done, we reduced our projection of an increase in sales from 1% to 0.3%. Median home price, and I can't believe I'm so close to Kalia here, but we were at a 4.2% increase. Now we're at 3.2%. Housing affordability still about 26%. And we've got the 30-year fixed rate mortgage at 4.3, which I think we may be revising upward. So here's the thing that kind of from a macro impact you've got to kind of think about in terms of economic growth and the stimulus that we're getting from the change in the tax code. This added about $1.4 trillion to the deficit, right? There's a lot of stimulus on the corporate side and also more on the corporate side, but also on individual taxpayers in terms of getting more money back, right? So that provides a lot more fuel and stimulus to the economy. We're already in full employment. Oh my goodness, we're going up to a higher inflation situation, and we're super worried about what the Fed's going to do. Are they going to take the punch bowl away now that the party's been going on for 10 years? So that's really the problem. And so, you know, we have tax cuts, we have bigger deficits, and more potential for inflation. So that's really one of the I think the biggest thing this year that we're going to be keeping our eye on. And I just want to say one thing about the price and sales forecast. All of this is happening in what is now a normal, but in any other time would be an abnormal environment. We have a very strong economy and we have no housing inventory, right? It's very, very tight. So when you have something like tax reform that has these very specific changes, right, in the tax code, and you can do kind of a partial derivative analysis and say, okay, everything else remaining the same, if this happens, cost of home ownership is going to go up, demand is going to go down, prices are going to go down, blah, 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 blah. And then when that doesn't happen, you're like, what happened? Well, what happened is you have an excess demand for housing. You don't have enough supply. So even with those changes, you're not going to see it in the marketplace. And as I've seen the reports coming in on the January sales, for example, up in the Bay Area, I've had 3 companies reporting that it was the best January they've had in the history of the company, right? Things are absolutely booming. So everything, you know, that's why this is kind of an art, a bit of an art and not a science. It's really important to just think these things through. We're all kind of surprised about the drop in the market, right? But hopefully none of us are surprised that we're surprised, right? Because we've been thinking about this and talking about it for at least the last couple of years, right? We were expecting it to happen at some point. We're surprised that it happened on January 27th, but we're not surprised that we're surprised. Do you see what I mean? That you've got to kind of think these things through. So here's kind of the temperature of the macro economy. Fourth quarter GDP came in at 2.6%. That was a little below what we saw in the second and third quarters, which were 3% or above. But given the hurricanes and the fires that impacted not just us, but other parts of the country, that was a very acceptable level of growth. Consumer spending up 3.8, unemployment 4.1, job growth 1.5%. So GDP came in last year at a 2.3% growth rate. GDP in 2016 was at a 1.5% growth rate. So I think we're getting a little bit, and we'll get a little bit closer in 2018. We may not reach an average of 3%, but we're getting up into higher numbers because of all the stimulus that's been thrown at the economy with the tax cuts, and then we'll see what happens with the infrastructure spending as well. The unemployment rate in California ended the year in December at 4.3%. The highest unemployment areas are in the Central Valley, and they're always the highest unemployment areas, right? They don't have the kind of sexy, high-tech coastal jobs that we've got in Southern California and the Bay Area. The tightest markets are in the San Francisco Bay Area, Santa Clara, and San Francisco. San Francisco unemployment rate is 2.4%. And in LA, where are we with LA? 4.2%. Orange County is the tightest in Southern California. So the blue line there is the US job gains. The red bars are California job gains. And between about 2012 and halfway through last year, California's job growth exceeded the national job growth. Today we are below, and in the spring of last year, we had 2 months where our growth was below the US growth. And this is the concern going forward with California's growth. Without housing, you can't continue to grow. And the migration numbers that we're tracking from data sources like the American Community Survey show an acceleration in out-migration, not from the millionaires who don't like our tax code. They can afford to live here. This is the working class, this is the middle class, and these are the millennials that are being attracted to other parts of the country. So that's why that's a bit of a problem. Whenever you look at migration numbers, think this is a housing story. Household formation has bounced back in California, also nationally, from a low of in 2011. And this again reflects the recovery in the labor market, right, in jobs. People are leaving their parents' homes. I know some of you still have kids at home, that's okay, but the job market is back, so they might want to up their game a little bit. And it's also, you know, bodes well for the fact that there are jobs out there. How are consumers feeling? You know what? Consumer confidence is finally up above what it was before we had the financial crisis. A year ago, we talked about the kind of trepidation I felt after the Trump election. How are people going to feel about this, you know, in terms of confidence? Great or, oh my goodness, right? And the reality is we had a Trump bump. It pulled back a little bit when kind of making some of the things happen on his agenda took longer than expected. But in general, people are feeling pretty positive. And you know why? Up until January 26th, they were looking at the stock market, and they're still looking at the equity in their homes, right? And they've had significant growth over the last 5 years. Again, the big focus is going to be on the inflation numbers, but be really, really careful. The January numbers were higher than expected, and there was a little bit of a, I think the analysts were freaking out. The market kind of took it pretty well. But last January, it was also that high. So there are kind of seasonal abnormalities in some of this data. Don't freak out about it a given month. All that being said, we are seeing tightening and upward pressure on inflation. And so what that means is, as the gavel was passed on February 5th from Janet to Jerome, right, we are in an environment where we're going to see more than 3 Fed increases this year, right? That's what was kind of baked in to 2018 at the end of last year, right? They told us, they signaled, they said, we're going to see at least 3 increases in the funds rate, and now consensus is it likely will be 4, it could be more. Expect the first increase in March, right, at their overall March meeting. So let me talk a little bit about us. This is a look at closed escrows in the state going back to 1971, and the red line is membership in the California Association of Realtors. So there's typically a 2-year lag between the market and membership. The market peaks, and 2 years later, the membership peaks. The market bottoms, 2 years later, membership bottoms. We will, for the first time since 2006, be seeing slightly above 200,000 members in the California Realtor family in the year 2018. One of the concerns we have is that half of those realtors haven't had a transaction in the last year, right? Productivity, it's interesting, if you go back 20 years, the median transactions per member was upwards of 10, and now it's about 5, right? So even with all this technological advances that we've seen, right, its productivity is lower, and we really have to think about what's going on. And you know what I think? I think the fancy back-end stuff that we do to make the transaction go through faster, which is great, isn't the hard part of the business. You know, the hard part of the business, you can't really point and click. You know, you've really got to connect with people, and that hasn't really changed. How's the market? So I noticed something, that when I read about the California housing market. The superlative, the adjectives are like strong, robust, great market. And I'm looking at the sales chart going, what are they talking about? You know, we have essentially had flat sales since about 2010. And that's in a period where you've had historically low rates, where you've had household formation growing, you've had incredible job growth. Like, what's going on, right? Well, we know what's going on, right? Lack of affordability. But if I just look at the numbers in terms of transactions, I'm disappointed, right? We have fewer sales today than when we had 10 million fewer people living in California, right? That's the environment. But most people are looking at prices, and I think a friend of mine said, you know why that is? Because most real estate reporters used to either be financial reporters or sports reporters. And that's all about price and winning and scores, and you're looking at price all the time. But I'm also looking at transactions, and this is what concerns me, right? We don't have nearly the volume that we should have given the overall fundamentals of the market. Another thing I'd like to say is this market is no longer recovering from anything. This is our market. Back in 2009, 30% of the transactions were traditional equity sales. And today that number is 97.5%. Back in January of 2009, 10% short sale, today 0.7, right? And REO has dropped from 60% down to 1.3%. So these are the statewide numbers. Clea gave you the numbers for Santa Barbara. So if you just eyeball that chart, January 2014, that's when the current market stopped. That's the new normal. That's when the recovery was over because we'd sold off all of the distressed properties. So when I talk about inventory and how I would not encourage anyone to expect a big surge in inventory, this is what I'm talking about, right? This is the new normal. What about prices? Well, the price gains, as you've seen in Santa Barbara, have been really, really robust. The state for the year is going to come in at year-over-year basis in December was up 7.6%. So we're in the high mid-single digits in terms of overall price appreciation. This is just a look at the rate of change. It peaked in the middle of 2013, and that's when we're almost transitioned out of a lower price distressed market, right, into a more equity, higher end market. We had the rate of change come down, and again, for the last 4 years, we've kind of been in this mid-single digit in terms of price appreciation. So you can use this information. I mean, you know, my advice to everyone is use the data that you've got. Never have this be your opinion about what's going to happen or how things look or whatever, but use the wonderful analytics that you have available from the board to kind of show your expertise and do that. Sales in the lower end of the market in December were down. And that's not because demand was down, that's because supply is so constrained at the entry level. Sales at the upper end were actually high. We had a robust high-end market statewide at the end of 2017. And I believe this was trying to beat out tax reform, you know, to get in before you had that lowering in the cap and maybe get in before you started to see the rise in rates. So there should be a sense of urgency in the market today that you didn't see 6 months ago, right, in terms of a reason to act today in terms of tomorrow. Inventory, okay, between like 1985 and 2009, average inventory was about a 6 to 7 month supply in this state. That is what I would have considered to be a balanced market. That was the long-term trend. Since that time, for the state as a whole, it's been about a 3 month supply. In the Bay Area, it's a 1 month supply, and off-market listings are proliferate in very high-end markets. So there's a dirty data issue without not being able to easily count them. At the end of December, active listings statewide were down 12% from last December. So this tightening of the inventory is very clear. And housing supply, this is just kind of a breakout by region. And here's the constrained supply, the big drop in the low end, and moving on up. So Kalia talked about where Santa Barbara is compared to where you were. In Southern California right now, Orange County is the only county where the median home price is above the prior peak, which was in June of 2007. And ignore the Santa Barbara one because that's the county, and the South County data obviously is much more relevant. In the Central Coast, what you have happening is people very interested in moving there and commuting to either the Bay Area or Los Angeles. I have someone on my staff who lives in San Luis Obispo and comes down for 4 days and works at C.A.R. and works from home on Friday because that was a way that they could have a lifestyle that was worth working for. Right, it wasn't happening living in the LA area. And you can see both San Luis Obispo and Santa Cruz are closest to their prior peak. In the Central Valley, everybody's below their prior peak, some of them significantly, and those are the areas where you just don't have the kind of robust job growth that makes them attractive for people to live there. What about the Bay Area? Well, May 07 to November, San Francisco was up 54.3% above their prior peak. Santa Clara 48.3, San Mateo 45.2. So you know how the chemistry and biology, the real sciences kind of look their nose down at the social sciences. I don't know if you know about that, but that's true. And one of the things that is really interesting about the Bay Area is that it really is a controlled experiment. It's like a petri dish where you have strong household formation, you have strong job growth, you have strong income growth, and you have very little housing growth. And this is what happens, right? This is what happens. So, if you drive until you qualify, you're going out to the Central Valley, you're going over the hill below Monterey, you're looking at San Joaquin, Stanislaus. I mean, you're going far away, and we saw this before. A few things about housing affordability. You saw in Santa Barbara the bottoms in 2011. Did anyone sell a house then? Like, you want to contact those people and go over with a bottle of champagne and cheers because they bought at the bottom of the market, right? They bought at the kind of once-in-a-generation opportunity to do that in California, so that's great. That window has obviously closed. Only 29% of the households in California can afford to buy the median-priced home. In Santa Barbara, it's 18%, and it's only because of North County. It's not because of what's going on here. So another way to look at this in terms of understanding the supply issue is the turnover in housing. How quickly is the market turning over? And today, the latest data for 2016 is that 4.6% of the housing stock in California changed hands. In the late 70s, it was 8.5%. But this isn't just a California phenomenon. It's not just a Prop 13 issue. You're seeing that nationally as well. So this issue of the boomers not moving isn't unique to California. And it's, as one of the boomers, they've just done it differently forever, and they're going to continue to do so. They don't want to pay the capital gains tax hit. Right? They want that $500,000 may have sounded great in 1986. It's not doing it for a lot of them today. They do like their property tax base, which is one of the reasons why I hope everyone will sign the petition to get, yay, there we go. We need your signature. to get our tax basis portability initiative on the ballot. So please help us out with that. And if you need detailed information on what it's going to do, you can call the board. We've got it on the C.A.R. website. We can kill you with numbers, but at least sign the petition so we can get going and try to get this thing passed and try to get some of the boomers a little bit more incentive to make a move, right? Because they wouldn't lose their low tax rate. Rising rates mean that people are going to be holding on to that mortgage, right? So that's going to be less of an incentive to move. We also have a world in which people are getting married later, they're having children later, and because, there was this big delayed adulthood on the part of the kids, right? They went to college, there weren't any jobs, they moved back home. They really didn't kind of get adult early, right? And now that's going to start happening, and hopefully they will. And I think the other problem is, let's say you're in your 60s and you're ready to downsize, but where do you go, right? Do you really want to compete with the millennials for a condo somewhere, right? It's really tough, and so we've got a explosion in people remodeling, right? Putting in those little stair seat things and elevators and all that stuff. There's a lot of workarounds when you're a baby boomer. But here's the problem with housing affordability and supply. At some point, it becomes a demand problem, and all that means is economic growth cannot thrive in an environment where workers can't afford to buy a home and have a life, right? It's really as simple as that. Let me tell you about another thing that's impacting housing supply, and that's investor ownership of single-family homes. So this is just a graph that shows you in red renter-occupied single-family homes going up in 2009, 2010, 2011, as owner-occupied single-family homes dropped. So here's a compare and contrast. In 2005, California had 6.9 million owner-occupied single-family homes. 10 years later, that dropped to 6.5 million. Investor-owned single-family homes in the same 10-year period went from 1.94 to 2.674. So that's kind of another reason why we don't have as much inventory, because it's been taken from the ownership pool and it's in the renter pool. And if you are an investor owner of a single-family home, can you see a comparable investment opportunity anywhere? Nope. Right? Why would you sell? Why would you do that? Another way of looking at the supply issue, and this is endemic across the state. We just give you LA, 381,000 new jobs, 88,000 new housing units in a 6-year period. And every single county with any significant job growth has the same issue. They don't build enough homes, hence pressure on infrastructure. A few things about migration. We do an annual survey. I just brought one slide from it where we ask you about your last closed transaction. And one of the questions was, where is the seller's new home located? Where were they going? And in 2013, only 19% of you said my seller was going to another state. In 2017, 28% of you said, my seller is going to another state. So where do Californians go? 5 states primarily. Texas, Arizona, Nevada, Washington, and Oregon, right? They tend to stay pretty close. These are the numbers on net domestic out-migration from California. You can just visually see that they're starting to ramp up again. Here's a look at who we're losing by income. So this idea that rich people aren't staying here because of our tax code, I don't know what's going to happen in the future with the changes that we saw. We'll have to see. But looking back, I believe this data is from 2016. It wasn't the people earning $100,000 or more. it was the 50 to 100,000 income people and lower that we were losing. So it's the cost of housing. There's a national franchise called Next Home, and I was talking to the broker last year, and he said, you know, Leslie, we have an office in Austin, and 70% of our out-of-state buyers are from California. We have an office in Raleigh, it's 40%, and we have an office in Portland. 30% of our out-of-state buyers are coming from California. And then just a little bit more data that's really interesting, like the Milken Institute every year, they should be out with it for last year very soon, looks at best performing large cities and best performing small cities. And they're really looking at areas that have kind of the new age information, high-tech kind of jobs that are driving many parts of the economy. And if you look at the top 10 best performing large cities, it's a lot of your usual suspects, right? You've got San Jose right at the top. You've got Provo, Utah as number 2, Austin number 3, San Francisco, Dallas, Raleigh, Nashville, Fort Collins, Orlando, and Seattle. Here's the wake-up call for Californians. 30 years ago, we had flyover states, right? Today, the flyover states are destination states for millennials looking to start a life and own a home and have a career and a family, right? Because they're being priced out of the California market. And then if you look at the small cities, it's kind of all over the map. And telecommuting, like telecommuting's been around since the telephone, right? But it's starting to really have an impact, and that's what's happening in the Central Coast. So I'm almost done here. I want to let you know that we have a lot of data on the website, market data, and it's in the Industry 360 area. And we have interactive dashboards that you can literally go in for not just the county, but by zip code, right? I mean, for years, people were saying, Leslie, we don't care about the state or the county because we're different. Has anyone here ever said that? We are unique. You know, the problem is everywhere I go, they're unique. So everybody's unique. This is great. But the interactive market stats really allow you to drill down. Here's a look at the dashboard. You can look at the luxury market. You can look at the entry-level market. You can do all kinds of fun stuff. And if you wanted, I could send one of my wonderful economists up here to do a show and tell or a workshop or something. But you know, this is free for you as a member of C.A.R. and it's really good stuff. We've spent a lot of blood, sweat, tears, and money kind of getting the MLS feeds and cleaning the data and really setting it up in a way that you guys can tell the story. Finally, we have a podcast that our economists do every 2 weeks. It's called the Housing Matters Podcast, if you want to hear kind of their take on what's going on. And then I think I already gave you the forecast, so I won't do that. But what else did I want to tell you? Hold on, I know I've talked too long. I guess I want to say one other thing. What to expect? Stronger economy. Our competitive edge may not be as strong as it has been in the past. Rates are up. Affordability is a problem. Boomers aren't moving. Millennials are. Listings and new units below trends, and we've got a lot of investor ownership going on. Here was something that I really loved. Have you seen all the surveys that come out and say, here's how buyers found their agent? And it's, Zillow has it, Truly, I mean, everybody's kind of got Realtor.com, NAR. So this is from our survey where we actually asked you, we asked the realtor, how did that client find you? And it's interesting. The top 5 responses, which I think just eyeballing it is probably 85% of the total, all have to do with a personal relationship. Represented them in a prior home was over 20%. Client was a friend, relative, or neighbor, about 18%. Referral from a client, 15%. Recommendation of friends, 10%. Referral from a business associate, 8%. So again, you're going to see other surveys that say people are finding their agent online and people are finding them through Zillow and all of these things, but really understand that there's still this incredible connection that goes on in terms of, and I think that's why productivity is challenged, you know, even with all the bells and whistles, it is that incredible connection. So I'm often asked, what are we reading at C.A.R.? The two books that the committee, the Strat Planning Committee read for this first meeting in January was The Truth About Your Future and a book called Bold. And I highly recommend both of them. They overlap a little bit. Kind of the takeaway is everything you think is happening in the future is already happening today. And, you know, be aware of it. But I have one last story to share. In Bold, they talk about a meeting that Jeff Bezos had with his leadership team sometime in the past. And he brought them all together and he said, look guys and gals, look everybody, I'm a little bit tired about talking about everything that's changing. I want to talk for a minute about things that aren't changing. I know, for example, that I am never going to have a customer complain that the inventory, the selection was too great, that the price was too low, and that the package arrived too quickly. So why don't we focus on those three things, okay? And you can see that they have, right? And I think there's a lot of takeaways for our industry, right? In terms of delivering service, expertise, and value. So don't lose sight of that in all of the crazy stuff we're dealing with. So sorry to go on a little too long. Thanks for having me.